course, there are the more personal and perhaps worrisome elements of what counts as a religion, as opposed to perhaps a cult, right, which you'll see coming up in our first discussion, right? So what counts as a religion is going to be really important both for individuals, right, and for the larger society. And so it's going to be important to understand what is going to count as a religion and why. And so Ninian Smart's approach is to avoid this problem altogether. So he's not going to try to give you just a definition of what religion is. Instead, he's going to give us a set of dimensions. So you can think of this like a checklist, right? In order to be a religion, you have to have all of these things. And he's going to separate these dimensions into two broad categories: the para-historical dimensions and the historical dimensions. And the important thing to understand about these two is that the different dimensions in these two categories will depend upon whether or not you have to be a part of that religion in order to fully understand that dimension. So para-historical dimensions refer to those experiences and inner lives of the practitioners. So this means that in order to understand the para-historical dimensions of a religion, you have to be part of it, right? So there's going to be a difference between observing someone in prayer and being in prayer, right? And that there's something about experiencing prayer that's going to give you a fuller, more in-depth understanding of that dimension of religion, as opposed to just watching it from the outside. So these para-historical dimensions include the practical and the ritual. I'll let you take a look at these. The experiential and emotional. The narrative and mythical. Right? So these are the ideas that we only get a full comprehension of by participating in the religion. There's some elements of it that we can learn from the outside, but not to the extent that someone immersed in that religion would have. The other set of dimensions, on the other hand, are historical dimensions. On the other hand, are historical dimensions. And this is really important because these can be studied empirically, and as a result, you could potentially be outside of a religious tradition and know more about the historical dimensions than someone in that religion. And unfortunately, that happens more often than you would think, right? A lot of people who ascribe to a certain religious tradition don't really have a very full or in-depth understanding of its history, right? Or of its broader doctrines. And so these are the ones that we're going to be focusing on, right, primarily because they can be studied empirically from a secular perspective and can be known just as well, if not better than, those who are practitioners. So these historical dimensions include the doctrinal and philosophical, right? So these are the systematic formulations of religious teachings in an intellectually coherent form, i.e. using logic, right? And they're going to provide rational explanation for the types of practices and ideas, right, that we saw in the para-historical dimension, right? So if we're looking at perhaps why you need to perform a ritual in a certain way, what purpose a narrative or a mythic account is having, right, these are going to be connected to this doctrinal and philosophical justification. Okay, so by doctrines, right, we're just referring to the beliefs about certain entities, whether they be divine or natural, that exist in the world, and the relationship between the two, right? So by doctrines, we're talking about sets of beliefs about the things that exist and their relationships to one another. Other historical dimensions are going to include the ethical and legal. This too runs into the realm of philosophy in the sense that we're going to look at what the connection is between religion and ethics, right? But the idea here is that the religion is seen as prescribing a certain set of rules about human behavior, of which then communities can then use someone's adherence to those rules to either shame them or praise them, right? So it's often these tools or these rules end up becoming tools, instruments for maintaining a certain religious community. The next one is social and institutional, right? So this has to do with the groups or organizations, right, which are used to keep communities of religious individuals together. It's also how these religions perpetuate themselves, right? How they make themselves continue. I know this is one of the challenges that the Catholic Church is experiencing right now, is that while we might not see a decline in Christianity writ large, Catholicism is having a particularly hard time attracting young people, right? So the idea is that there's something about the institution or the social community that is not as appealing to younger generations, right? And so this is going to be something that the religion will want to address because they're going to want to see their traditions continue. These institutions and social communities can also involve specific places of worship, right? Whether they be at church, temple, mosque, monastery, whatever it is. And this has to do with the final dimension, which was added after the first six, and this is the material dimension, right? So these are the objects that can symbolize either the sacred or the supernatural, right? And they can be very vast in their variety, right? But they are associated with the religion, right, by representing or symbolizing certain important facets. Okay, so how do we want to use these ideas, right? The 7 dimensions. Again, we want to use it as a sort of checklist. So if we're looking at something, trying to figure out if it should count as a religion, we want to see if it has each of these 7 things. But ironically, the problems with the Durkheimian and Taylorian definitions of religion are going to emerge for Ninian Smart as well, in that things like nationalism, Marxism, probably even sports too, right, might have all of these 7 dimensions.